Good morning. Today we are going to analyze one problem question on non-fatal offences. The video content has been made available for informational and educational purpose only. Kindly go through this slide completely. Let's start with the problem question. Rhonda and Stephen are partners. One day, when they are sitting on the sofa, Stephen starts tickling Rhonda. For a while, she finds this enjoyable, but then becomes breathless. As she suffers from asthma, she tells Stephen to stop, but he carries on. In attempting to escape, Rhonda jumps off the sofa, as a consequence of which she twists her ankle, causing it to painfully swell up. Stephen apologizes and bends over Rhonda to help her up. Rhonda mistakes Stephen's intention and hit him over the head with a rolling pin, causing him to lose consciousness for a few minutes. When he regains consciousness, Stephen is angry and strides over, intending to punch Rhonda. In doing so, he trips and falls on top of her, causing her to suffer a panic attack, which precipitates an asthma attack. Stephen takes her to the hospital where, due to medical error, Rhonda is given an overdose of a palliative drug intended for another patient. This sends Rhonda into a coma. She regains her consciousness a few days later with no ill effects. If you are a prosecutor, what your preferred charge in relation to Stephen and the match of Ronda's twisted ankle? And you have to give the reason for your choices in the option A, including an explanation as to why you choose as you did rather choosing a different charge. If you are a Stephen's defense counsel, what argument would you advance in response to charge under the question A? How would the prosecution counter the arguments raised in the question C? If you were prosecuting counsel, what would you be preferred charge against Rhonda in the matter of Stephen's injuries? The next question is you have to give the reason for your choice in the question E, including an explanation as to why you chose as you did rather than choosing a different charge. The next question, if you were defense counsel, what argument would you raise in response to the charge in the question E above? If you were a prosecuting counsel, how would you respond to the argument in question G above? The question I, if you were a prosecuting counsel, what would be preferred charge against Stephen in the matter of Ronda's asthma attack and coma? You have to give reason for your choices in the question I, including an explanation as to why you chose as you did rather than choosing a different charge. The last question is if you were the defense counsel, what arguments would you raise in response to the charge in I, in the question I above? Let's analyze the each and every problem question one by one. In relation to Ronda's twisted ankle, the Section 47 of Offences Against the Person Act 1861, OAPA 1861, is the most appropriate charge. Section 47 covers the actual bodily harm, which includes any injury that interferes with the victim's health or comfort. A twisted ankle, though not extremely serious, is painful and can interfere with the movements, meeting the threshold for ABH, the actually bodily harm. It is important to note that Section 20 of OAP 1861, which deals with grievous bodily harm, would not be suitable because the injury does not qualify as a serious harm, as explained in R versus Miller in 1954 case, where the court confirmed that harm should be more substantial to fall under the Section 20. Therefore, Section 47 is the appropriate charge. In other words, as a prosecutor, the preferred charge against Stephen would be assault occasioning actual bodily harm, that is ABH, under the Section 47 of the Offences Act, Offences Against the Person Act 1861. The actus reus involves causing the harm that is more trivial but less than serious, and the mens rea requires an intention to commit the attack or the recklessness as to the consequences. By continuing to tickle Rhonda despite her telling him to stop, Stephen engaged in contact that resulted in her twisting her ankle while attempting to escape. So it fulfills the actus reus for the ABH. In this question, we have to give the reason for our choices in the question A, including an explanation as to why we chose as we did rather than choosing a different charge. The reason for selecting the section 47 instead of the section 20 is based on the severity of the injury. While the ankle twist causes the rod of pain and discomfort, it does not reach the threshold required by grievous bodily harm under the section 20. In R versus Miller case, the court held that a definition of ABH under the section 47 covers injuries that are painful but not life-threatening or the serious enough to warrant a charge of grievous bodily harm. Therefore, section 47 of the ABH is the most appropriate choice. In other words, section 47 ABH is appropriate because Ronda's injury, a twisted ankle with a painful swelling, constitute actual bodily harm as per R versus Miller case in 1954, which defines ABH as an injury calculated to interfere with the victim's health or comfort. A more severe charge, such as grievous bodily harm, would not be suitable as the injury does not meet the threshold of serious harm under DPP versus Smith case in 1961. Similarly, the common assault under Section 39 of the Criminal Justice Act 1988 would not reflect the extent of the harm caused. The third question, if you were the Stephens defense counsel, what arguments would you advance in response to the charge in the question A? As a Stephen defense counsel, an argument could be made that there is no causation between the Stephen's tickling and Ronda's injury, as the injury were self-inflicted when Ronda jumped off the sofa in an attempt to escape. Tickling, especially in a playful context, has been considered consequential in the context of horseplay in previous cases like R vs. Jones in 1986 case and R vs. Aitken in 1992 case. In these cases, the court found that injuries resulting from the consensual playful activities, including the rough play, did not amount to criminal offenses. Furthermore, Stephen did not intend to harm Rhonda, and the injury was not directly caused by him, making it a plausible defense that the injury was self inflicted during an attempt to escape. In other words, as a defense counsel, I would argue that Stephen lacked the requisite mens rea for the section 47 of ABH, as his actions were not intended to harm Rhonda, and he may not have foreseen the risk of injury. Following the R vs. Savage case in 1991, the ABH requires recklessness as to the act and not the harm. Stephen may assert that his actions were playful and the injury was the unforeseen consequences of Rondo's voluntary act of jumping off the sofa. Additionally, I could argue that Rondo's reaction was a novus actus intervenience that broke the chain of causation as seen in R versus Roberts case in 1971. How would the prosecution counter the arguments raised in the question C? The prosecution would counter that the Stephens continued tickling despite Ronda's protest, demonstrated recklessness as to her discomfort and potential harm, satisfying the mens rea for Section 47 under the ABH under R versus Savage case in 1991. Additionally, the act of jumping off the sofa to escape was a forcible response to Stephens' actions, as established in R versus Roberts in 1971 case, maintaining the chain of causation. The injury was a direct consequence of Stevens' context. In other words, the prosecution could counter the defense by arguing that although tickling may have started as a consensual, Rhonda withdrew her consent when she told Stephen to stop. Under the case law in R versus Olympia in 1982, a consent can be withdrawn at any time, and continuing after the withdrawal would render Stephen's actions unlawful. Stephen continued the tickling even after Rhonda asked him to stop, meaning he acted recklessly, disregarding the risk of the harm, and thus could still be held liable for the injury caused by Rhonda's escape. The next case and the next question: if you were prosecuting counsel, what would you be preferred charge against Rhonda in the matter of Stephen's injuries? In the matter of Stephen injuries caused by Rhonda, the use of the rolling pin, the preferred charge would be Section 20 of OAPA 1861 for the grievous bodily harm. Rhonda hit the Stephen with a rolling pin, causing him to lose consciousness for a few minutes. This injury is serious enough to be classified as a grievous bodily harm, especially given the loss of consciousness and the potential for long term effects. In R versus DPP case in 2006, the court held that the injuries causing a loss of consequences could qualify as GBH. And in this case, the injury caused by Rondo's strike will likely meet this threshold. In other words, the preferred charge against Rhonda would be the common assault under Section 39 of the Criminal Justice Act 1988. The actus res of the assault involves the application of unlawful force, and the mens rea requires an intention to apply force or the recklessness as to the application of the force. By striking Stephen with a rolling pin, Rhonda intentionally caused him to lose the consciousness temporarily, fulfilling the both elements of the common assault. Give reason for your choice in the question E, including an explanation as to why you chose as you did rather than choosing a different charge. Section 20 is chosen over the Section 47 because the injury to Stephen was more than just an inconvenience or the minor injury. The fact that Stephen lost the consciousness, for a few minutes suggests that the injury was serious and could meet the criteria of grievous bodily harm. Under the case of R. versus Smith in 1961, the court confirmed that the definition of grievous bodily harm under the Section 20 is broader and includes the injuries that are serious enough to result in the loss of consciousness or require the substantial medical treatment. The nature of the injury here aligns more with grievous bodily harm than with actual bodily harm. In other words, the common assault is appropriate because the injury, a temporary unconsciousness, is relatively minor and does not rise to the level of actual bodily harm under Section 47. While the Stephens loss of consciousness could potentially be argued as actual bodily harm under T versus DPP case in 2003, the circumstances suggest Rono's action were reactive and lacked premeditation. Charging her with actual bodily harm would be disproportionate to the harm caused. If you were at the defense counsel, what argument would you raise in response to the charge in the question E? As Rhoda's defense counsel, it could be argued that she acted in self-defense. In R versus Martin case in 2001, the court held that a defendant can use a reasonable force in self-defense if they honestly believe they are under the threat, even if that belief is mistaken. Rhoda might argue that in the heat of the moment, she believed she needed to defend herself from an imminent threat from Stephen, especially given the context of their volatile relationship and Stephen's previous aggression. The honest belief in the need to act in self defense could provide a reasonable explanation for Rhoda's use of force. In other words, as defense counsel, I would argue that Rondo's action were reasonable response under the self-defense principle as per R versus Williams case, the Gladstone case in 1984. Ronda mistakenly believed that Stephen intended to harm her, and her use of force was proportionate to her perceived threat. Self-defense applies even if the belief is mistaken, provided it was honestly held. Additionally, Rhoda's action was spontaneous and not premeditated, supporting a claim of necessity rather than aggression. How the prosecution responds to the arguments in the previous question. The prosecution would likely counter this defense by arguing that the degree of force used was disproportionate to any threat Ronda faced. In R versus Palmer case in 1971, the court emphasized that the force used in self-defense must be proportionate to the threat, since Stephen was not directly threatening Ronda at the time, and she struck him with a rolling pin. The force used could be considered excessive, undermining her claim of self defense. Moreover, self defense would only apply if Rhonda genuinely and reasonably believed there was an immediate threat, and it may be difficult to argue that such a belief existed given the circumstances. In other words, the prosecution would argue that Rwanda's use of force was excessive and unnecessary, as Stephen's action at that moment were not threatening but intended to assist her. Under R versus Clegg case in 1995, the self-defense fails if the force used is disproportionate. Rondo's reaction, striking Stephen with a rolling pin, exceeded what was reasonably under the circumstances, negating the defense. If you were prosecuting counsel, what would you be preferred charge against Stephen in the match of Rondo's asthma attack and coma? In relation to Rondo's asthma attack and coma, the preferred charge against Stephen would likely be the Section 20 of OAPA 1861 for inflicting the grievous bodily harm. Stephen's actions, while not directly causing the asthma attack, were part of sequence of the events that led to Rhonda suffering a panic attack, which then precipitated her asthma attack. This meet the criteria of inflicting grievous bodily harm as established in R versus Bristow case in 1997, where the court confirmed that grievous bodily harm can be caused by a sequence of events, even if not directly caused by the defendant's initial actions. In other words, the preferred charge against Stephen would be assault occasioning the actual bodily harm under Section 47 of the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861. The panic attack leading to the asthma attack constitute the actual bodily harm as established in R versus Ireland and R versus Bristow case in 1998, where the psychological harm is included within ABH. We have to give the reason for our choice in question I, including the explanation as to why we chose as we did rather than choosing a different charge. Section 20 is more appropriate than Section 47 because Ronda's coma resulting from an overdose administered at the hospital constitute a serious injury. The panic attack and subsequent asthma attack precipitated by Stephens fall on Ronda's qualify as grievous bodily harm, which requires a serious harm. In R versus Smith case, the court confirmed that serious injury includes harm that causes long-lasting physical effects, and the coma caused by the overdose fits within this definition. In other words, Section 47 of ABH is appropriate because Stephen action, striding angrily towards Rhonda with intent to punch, caused her to suffer a panic attack that precipitated her asthma attack. The actor's rest is satisfied as his actions directly caused harm. The mens rea is also satisfied as Stephen intended to frighten or the harm the Rhonda. A charge of common assault would not adequately reflect the harm caused, while the grievous bodily harm under Section 20 would be disproportionate given the temporary nature of the Ronda's condition. If you were the defense counsel, what argument would you raise in response to the charge in the question I? As a Stephen's defense counsel, it could be argued that there was no direct causation between his actions and Rhoda's coma effect. The overdose given at the hospital due to a medical error may break the chain of causation. In R versus Cheshire case in 1991, established that a medical treatment may break the chain of causation if it is independent of the defendant's actions, given that the overdose was caused by medical negligence. Stephen might argue that this intervening event break the chain, absolving him of responsibility for Ronda's coma. In other words, as a defense counsel, I would argue that the overdose administered at the hospital constitutes a novus actus intervenus, breaking the chain of causation, as per R versus Jordan case in 1956. Stephen could not have foreseen the medical error leading to Ronda's coma. Furthermore, I would contend that a panic attack was an unforeseeable and disproportionate reaction to Stephen action, potentially breaking the chain of causation under R versus Robert case in 1971. How would the prosecution counter the argument in the question K? The prosecution would argue that medical error did not break the chain of causation as it was not independent of Stephen's actions, aligning with R versus Cheshire in 1991. The panic attack and subsequent asthma attack were foreseeable consequences of Stephen's aggressive behavior, maintaining the causation. Thus, Stephen remains liable for the resulting harm. To conclude, Stephen faces charges under Section 20 of OAPA for causing serious injury to Rwanda, while the rolling pin, while Rwanda may face the charges under Section 20 of OAPA for Stephen's injuries. A charge for Rwanda's asthma attack and the coma would likely fall under the Section 20 of OAPA as well. Both the prosecution and the defense would rely heavily on the details of the causation and the proportionality of the force used, with the case laws such as R versus Miller, R versus Bristow, and R versus Palmer playing the key roles in determining the liability. Thank you.